Welcome once again to RWR Plays TEW 2020. This is Chapter 42 of WCW Lives On and the season finale of 2001 as we have come to Starrcade finally right at the end of December, the final in-game, and we finally have arrived. And that has been a long time coming, and that's partly because I have had to take large breaks in the middle of this series simply because of what's going on in my personal life. But I apologize for that. We are here now, though, so let's enjoy what we've got coming for you. Now, I do intend to continue the season in the future. After this episode, in the next couple of weeks, we'll be releasing some sort of recap of the year, some sort of summaries of the year episodes, including looking at what we've done, looking at our performance, assessing whether or not we've achieved the goals that we set out to achieve, and then another episode probably to look at the wider game world. It really depends on how long each one of those takes as to whether they will be 1 or 2 episodes. And then the intention is absolutely to continue the series beyond into 2002 for a new season, but there might be a little bit of a gap. Nonetheless, please click the subscribe button at the bottom to follow along with all of that that's still to come in this series and all the other videos that we provide on this channel. One last plug from me as well. If you fancy a bit of podcasting stuff and you looking for something new, the Random Wrestling Review is where this YouTube channel really all began. We have a podcast that has been going now for just over 4 years, and we have over 200 different shows that we have brought to people, and you can listen to them all now on the app, the podcasting app of your choice. So, Random Wrestling Review, pretty much everywhere you go. Ours is the one with the logo that is kind of a take on the NWO logo. Okay, so before we get to Starrcade, which is obviously the point of today's episode, let's just recap what took place on the Go Home TV taping prior to the pay per view, because at the end of the night on Nitro last week, it had all kicked off. Scott Steiner and Booker T performed the official weigh-in and were told by Eric Bischoff that they had an injunction against them both that would prevent them from making any physical contact until the bell rang at Starrcade. Then, after the weigh-in in a brawl that had evidently been going on in the back between Goldberg and Rick Steiner, it spilled out in front of the crowd with a large group of referees, officials, and other wrestlers trying to hold the two men apart. Booker and Scott Steiner both made their way towards the melee, but Nitro was forced to go off air, with them running up the entrance ramp towards it. Also on the show, Ric Flair and Sting made their place in the tag team title match at Starrcade, 100% official with victory over the American Mavericks. This prompted Lex Luger in an interview afterwards to warn Sting not to trust Ric Flair. On a night of backstage chaos, the Gothic collective attacked Curt Hennig in a 3-on-1 mugging until Jim Duggan and Bobby Eaton arrived on the scene. Also, Air Raid successfully defended their Cruiserweight tag team titles against Great Sasuke and Kaz Hayashi. Then on Saturday night, the Vigilante debuted in front of a live crowd after Reno cheated his way to victory against Mike Knox. The Vigilante attempted to even the scales of justice by chokeslamming Reno. So they were all the major happenings from the last TV taping that we did. It is now finally time to get to Starrcade. Okay, so here we are. It is time for Starrcade, and we are in the chase field for this particular show. 39,491 people in attendance for this major show. Great to be in front of such a large crowd. And we start with a pre-show battle royal. Now, I very much caved to WWE's kind of philosophy on booking everybody possible on the show, and I thought the best way to do that was to put on a pre-show battle royal. I don't know why. I got to the show and then looked at the numbers of people that were not included and thought we really need more people on this. We need to get as many people as possible onto this show. So all of these guys got an opportunity to be in front of the big crowd in a pre-show battle royal, which was won by Conan in 13 minutes and 9 seconds. The other members of the Final Four were Great Sasuke, Terry Funk, and AJ Styles, with Great Sasuke being the final elimination. And I was interested in that because I didn't tell the game who to give the victory to here. I thought, you know what, I'm going to be really kind of just a little bit, you know, random with it and let the game decide who will win. Well, Conan takes the victory, and I may do something with that as a consequence. A good segment rating of 62 for the Battle Royal, so a good way to start and get the crowd hyped up for what should be a great night of action. So into the show officially, and we start with the US title match between Mike Awesome and Lance Storm. Of course, two heels, two teammate heels going at it in the opening contest. And in a superb wrestling with great heat, Mike Awesome beats Lance Storm in 16 minutes and 40 seconds by pinfall with a roll-up. Mike Awesome makes defense number 7 of the WCW United States Heavyweight title. So Awesome retains the belt here in this battle of partners. An in-ring performance of 79 for Awesome, Storm an 83, a segment rating of 79. Possibly could have been even better if this was babyface heel, but certainly is a really heartening start to the show and a really good match here, no doubt about it. Awesome and Lance Storm do really well. The second match is one of the multi-man matches we've got. It's a 10-man tag. Shane Douglas, Brian Adams, Brian Clark, Kanyon and Bam Bam Bigelow against DDP, the European Union and the Windham brothers. And Douglas and his team get the victory when Bam Bam Bigelow pins Barry Windham. You can see here that top performers in the contest were Shane Douglas was a 73, Kanyon is 62, Diamond Dallas Page is 71. So who you'd imagine were the top performers. Bigelow gets the pin in front of the big crowd. Segment rating of 58, pretty decent for what was ultimately a not considerable match, really, and certainly wasn't one that we hyped up in great detail beforehand. Next, we get Jeff Jarrett's match with Eddie Guerrero. This one went to a draw in 12:39 when the match descended into chaos after Conan, Rey Mysterio Jr., Brian Armstrong, Billy Kidman, John Cena, and Mike Sanders all became involved. So these two factions are still battling it out. Segment rating of 75 is perfectly decent for such an inconclusive finish. But you can see here Jarrett had an 85 in-ring performance and Guerrero an 80. In some ways, I really struggle with this one because I didn't really want to give such a cheap finish to any of the matches, especially one here, which could have been really, really good. But I just felt like I wanted a bit of variety in terms of how the different conclusions of the different matches went. But also, I feel like this is a feud that's got legs in it, and I wanted to continue on. And I just didn't want a winner really out of these two at this point in time. So next up, we have the 6-man tag match, which sees the Gothic collective Vampiro, Jester, and Prodigy against Curt, Hennig, Bob Eaton, and Jim Duggan. And here, the Gothic collective get the victory when Vampiro pins Jim Duggan with a handful of tights. As you can see, Vampiro was head and shoulders above everybody else with his in-ring performance of 76, although Jester had a 62, Hennig a 65, so some good performers in amongst them. A segment rating overall of 65, which is really decent. And this was a nice match to continue what has been a steady pay-per-view to this point. Okay, so into some of the bigger matches, and we start with Rey Mysterio Jr. versus Billy Kidman in a bout that had great wrestling and good heat. Rey Mysterio beats Kidman in 14:59 by pinfall. Rey Mysterio Jr. makes defense number 1 of the Cruiserweight title. A segment rating only of 67, but you can see that both men performed much better than that. So I presume that that is largely a consequence of this being a babyface contest, which therefore wasn't quite as big as it could have been. So a little bit of a disappointment on the segment rating there, but I can understand why, given that both are baby faces. Then after the match, Rey Mysterio Jr. attempted to kind of offer his hand to shake in respect for one another, of course, the two being partners, but Rey was brushed past by Billy Kidman, and Kidman just left the ring without shaking Rey Mysterio Jr.'s hand. So Kidman ultimately refusing the handshake of Rey Mysterio Jr. in the aftermath. So a segment rating here of 60 could have been a little bit better, and Kidman potentially not happy with Rey Mysterio Jr. following that match. So then we've got Bill Goldberg versus Rick Steiner in a no disqualification match, and Goldberg wins by pinfall in 14 minutes and 30 seconds. You can see Goldberg's in-ring performance only a 75 and Steiner only a 63, and they don't click in terms of their performances. They don't have very good chemistry as opponents, and yet the segment rating is a massive 81. So a really good match between these two. I've really enjoyed putting this story together, mainly because it was quite late in the day when I was thinking about it. I've been obviously preparing for what Starrcade was going to have for a long time, and I knew what the two main matches were going to be, but that kind of left Goldberg spare, and I was like, how do we get Goldberg into any kind of a match going into this show? And I explored various different options for who his opponent could be at this pay-per-view. And when I landed on Rick Steiner, then it was a case of, okay, now we need to build a storyline within a month leading into Starrcade, and I feel like we've done a pretty decent job of it. And the heat, in particular, fantastic heat this match had, is what seems to have pushed this to a rating of 81. So I'm really pleased with that. So next it is the match for the tag team titles, and it's a bit of a disappointment. It had fantastic heat and good wrestling. Sting and Ric Flair defeat Totally Buff in 17:32 when Sting pinned Luger. Sting and Ric Flair win the World Tag Team titles. Lex Luger was the weak link, struggling to keep up with everyone else's performance. He was only a 57. But I'm disappointed as well, really, with the performances of Bagwell, 66, and he's been better than that in some matches recently. And actually, Sting and Flair equally didn't perform that well. Segment rating only 65, so I'm really quite disappointed with that one. But we have new tag team champions, Totally Buff, who've held the belts since the Big Bang in May, have lost the belts here to Sting and Ric Flair, and they are now the tag team champions. And so we come to the main event. It's Booker T versus Scott Steiner for the WCW title. And in a bout that had fantastic heat and great wrestling, Booker T defeated Scott Steiner in 15 minutes and 55 seconds by pinfall. Booker T make defense number 2 of the WCW World Heavyweight title, obviously since he's re-won it from Jarrett. A segment rating only of 79, and that is down to Booker T, who was off his game. And not only that, but Booker T and Steiner don't seem to click, and it made for an awkward bout. So they had issues with their chemistry as well, Booker T and Steiner. So that's another real disappointment. So segment rating here of 79. Scott Steiner was still a really great performance of 84. And yeah, Booker T gets the victory, retains the belt. After all this time, these two guys been building to this match really since March when Booker T defeated Scott Steiner for the belt. Booker T gets the victory here in 15:55. I kept the match relatively short because Scott Steiner has trouble with his stamina, can't really go much longer than that. So I would have ideally in the main event of such an epic pay-per-view like this to be a bit longer, but ultimately Booker T gets the win in 15 minutes 55 seconds. Then, after the match, Goldberg comes to the ring and indicates that he wants the world title, and the two men have a stare down as Starrcade ends with Booker T and Bill Goldberg. Booker T celebrating with the title, and Goldberg comes out and basically motions that he wants the belt, and they stare each other down, and the show comes to an end. The performance here of both these guys was excellent, but only a segment rating of 69, as neither really did anything. They just stood in the ring, and maybe that brought this down a bit. And so that was Starrcade. Perhaps a little bit disappointing, to be honest, overall. I think if I was a viewer going in to watch Starrcade, having watched the build to this, I would have been a little bit let down. I think there was obviously some really good matches. Goldberg versus Rick Steiner in particular, match of the night easily. Booker T versus Scott Steiner wasn't bad. It still take its place as one of the top sort of 20 matches I would think that we've had since we began the game. The opener also will be in that sort of category. Jarrett and Eddie Guerrero's match was good, but there is a feeling for me, and probably I would imagine for you too, that this could have been a better show. And maybe that's down to my booking. There are a couple of surprises we had in there. For example, the fact that Goldberg and Rick Steiner don't really click, and nor do Booker T and Scott Steiner. So that's something to be wary of in the future. But we got a big crowd for this, 39,491. The show increased our popularity in most of the regions where it could. An overall rating of 77. We've got to be, in the end, reasonably happy with what we've accomplished with this show. So, in terms of performances, well, I want to give Goldberg and Scott Steiner in particular praise for what they did. But I'm also going to praise Lance Storm because he was probably the performer of the night in terms of his overall performance. I'm just going to make that speech and they're happy and pleased, so that's all good. And that is Starrcade 2001 is over. We've finished 2001. Starrcade was the last night of the year. We're going to go straight into 2002. You can see the game here is doing some processing that it doesn't normally do at this point in the loading screen. And yeah, we've finished this season, the first season of this show. Already the game is given away for some of our kind of sort of overview of the year type stuff because The Rock has been declared Wrestler of the Year, as you can see from that top news story. We'll talk about that in one of our recap episodes. And I'm relatively happy with the way that went. I think it could have been a bit better. As I said, I feel like if I was watching the show as a viewer, I'd have been a little disappointed with the overall quality, but not to say it was abysmal or really bad. Just one of those shows that was all right, but didn't quite meet the hype or the expectation I had for it. So that is Starrcade 2001. That is the end of the first season of this show. We will be back again in the not too distant future. If you've enjoyed today, you've enjoyed any of these videos, please give us a like. If you're finding us for the first time, please go back and watch the whole series. There's a whole 42 episodes now in the book for you to go back and watch. And yeah, please subscribe to the channel to continue to follow on as we go into the future. Thank you very much for all of your support during this first season, and we'll catch you next time.